Americans are having a harder time trusting anyone these days, including pastors. Kate Shellnut has written an article reviewing the data results from a recent Gallup poll, asking participants their perception of clergy, or what we just call pastors. But first I'm going to show you this graph. For those that are listening, the graph shows the percentage of Americans who say clergy have high or very high levels of honesty and ethics. It shows the whole span of this information through the years 1977 and 2023. When the survey was first conducted in 77, 61% of respondents showed a high level of trust in clergy. But now, 46 years later, only 32% demonstrate that level of trust in clergy. So it's almost half the amount of people in less than 50 years. So let's see what Kate Shellnut's analysis of all this is, but I want to know why you think there is a significant lack of trust in clergy. Shellnut writes, people are more likely to believe in the moral standards held by nurses, police officers, and chiropractors than their religious leaders. Clergy are still more trusted than politicians and lawyers and journalists. The continued drop in pastors' reputation, down from 40% to 32% over the last 4 years, corresponds with more skepticism toward professions and institutions across the board. Americans are also less likely than ever to know a pastor, with fewer than half belonging to a church and a growing cohort who don't identify with a faith at all. So we see two reasons there. The first being a complete drop of trust in all professions, which we can speculate about because that's interesting all in itself. And secondly, there are significantly less people who know pastors because they don't belong to a church. And don't get me started on that subject. So we're going to focus on the article. As American culture becomes increasingly pluralistic and post-Christian, we can't assume that Americans in general default to a positive view of clergy, said Nathan Finn, Executive Director of the Institute for Transformational Leadership at North Greenville University. Ministers must work harder to gain public trust than was the case even a generation ago. Now, this is a great point. America has become increasingly non-Christian. Again, this is the fault of the church, but don't get me started. This means that Americans are progressively worldly, which is diametrically opposed to godliness, which obviously would entail an animosity toward and a lack of trust or faith in the leaders of the church. Finn also pointed out how scandals like clergy sex abuse, growing political polarization, and evangelicals' countercultural moral positions can contribute to the decline in credibility among clergy, especially among those who have either had bad church experiences or whose worldview assumptions are already at odds with historic Christian beliefs. I know what they're trying to say here, but this is a misattribution. The church is absolutely required to engage in cultural and political issues, but it has done a terrible job at that, and that's mostly because we drug our feet and didn't get ahead of the game. We're late to it. We weren't the salt and light we were supposed to be. Countless cultural problems have ensued, and now we're trying to play catch up, but we're doing it terribly. We just have to do it like Jesus did, loaded with grace and truth. I get the sex abuse reaction, but I think that's more so focused denominationally and in small circles. But now back to the article. Views of pastors did vary by generation. Elder millennials and Gen X were most cynical. Fewer than a quarter of people between ages 35 and 54 had a positive view of clergy ethics, compared to 38% of older Americans and 30% of those under 35. Positive perception of clergy among young people jumped by 10 percentage points compared to 2022. Well, that last part is good, But the rest of that information supports the idea concerning the generational progression away from Christianity and the church. They also said, though, previous polling has shown that people tend to trust their own pastor more than pastors overall. According to Barna Research, nearly 2/3 of Americans have a very positive opinion of a pastor they have a personal connection with, compared to 1/4 who said the same about pastors in general. Well, that's interesting. And I'm really curious to know what you think. So please leave me a comment. But the majority of Americans, it's saying, trust their own pastor, but not so much other pastors. To me, that says this distrust is almost like a default, but their pastor has earned their trust, maybe? I'm not sure. I mean, when I think about it, I pretty much feel the same way. I trust my pastor, but I know that I have significantly less trust in other clergy. But why is that? There's the secular explanation that America is fleeing God and His church, but why is trust eroding on the local level of the church, internally? And why has it progressively eroded for 50 years? Just leave me a comment and send me an email. I'm blake@wethefreeshow.com. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing the content, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the salt and light you are meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt, or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug, or you can sport the God Bless America shirt, and of course, the classic We the Free crest tee. We've even got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle. That's right. So check out our new merch at wethefreeshow.com.